Hi, so this is my poem, Spoils of the Dead by Robert Frost. And we're just going to go over it for you. To begin with, the title already is really captivating just because it's Spoils of the Dead, and spoils already has a very negative connotation. And just the whole title in general sets off a very ominous tone for the whole poem. Spoils can mean, to ruin or, to go bad, but in this sense, it's almost like representing goods that are stolen or taken forcibly. And then dead, of course, that's always just really bad. So the poem starts off with two fairies it was on a still summer day. So fairies are usually seen as small imaginary human beings or just like a being of human form. But in this particular poem, as you'll go on, you'll find that the fairies do have a very negative picture painted of them. So there are many, literary works and different poems that use fairies as almost a form of a demon that are very mischievous and malicious.
Yet it says on a still summer day, which you think a still summer day is quiet, it's peaceful, warm weather, almost a good thing, which is positive connotation. That mixed with the negative connotation of the fairies kind of foreshadows what's to come.
Right. So it's just kind of clashing a little bit there, but the whole picture you see it painted is really, it's really nice and it's sweet. And then it continues on with, came forth in the woods with the flowers to play, the flowers they plucked, they cast on the ground, for others and those for still others they found. And that just continues on, and the use of flowers is used throughout the whole poem. It's very repetitive. And looking it up, flowers is more than actually an actual object. It can represent, like a certain period of time where people are at their, most optimum development.
But also, flowers are used during funerals, even. So flowers can represent death as well.
But flowers can also be, besides being development, it can also be like the best of the best, almost. And then it continues on with flower guided it was, which kind of paints like a really innocent picture, if you're being flower guided, or it can also mean, kind of being going forward with the best intentions almost.
Guided by innocence, almost guided by ignorance as well.
Right. So flower guided it was that they came as they ran on something that lay in the shape of a man. Now Frost uses a lot of little different rhymes here. Just like ran and man, he definitely uses ground and found, day and play. And he continues on that the snow must have made the feathery bed when this one fell on the sleep of the dead. And this is where the tone change in the poem is. And specifically the line on the sleep of the dead is really significant because that can also be like, you can also say, almost eternal sleep, which just represents when someone, is dead.
They're not going to wake up.
Right. So the sleep of the dead.
And the fact that he says the snow must have made the feathery bed, it's that change from summer to winter where you would see the snow. And winter always represents kind of death, like all the leaves fall off the trees, it's cold, it's got a negative connotation, contrasting the positive connotation of the summer.
Right. And summer in literature usually means harmony or perfection. But he continues on, but the snow was gone a long time ago, and the body he wore nigh gone with the snow. So that one little section there was almost kind of thinking back on the past and how it brings you back to now that it's summer, the present. And again, that's kind of this very ominous, and it's a little creepy because the body that he wore, is gone with the snow. So basically, it's just he decomposed, and now it's just a skeleton.
And then they go to talk about the fairies come to him, like they go over to the dead body, and they find that he has a ring on his hand and a chain at his side. And these two objects, I think they represent like wealth and even like his last possessions that the man had, because they're two man-made, chains and rings, and then chain can mean to confine or to restrain. So that's odd.
And especially because it's associated with a ring, like the old ball and chain. I mean, we just thought that was kind of funny.
Are you guys recording or not?
And another significant part of this is that the fairies drew near and they keenly espied. Espied is an odd word choice there because that's spy is a derivative of espied. And espied is to catch sight of, but keenly is having or showing eagerness or enthusiasm. So they enthusiastically came towards the dead body. And so it says they knelt in the leaves, and the leaves was also kind of representative of the different seasons as well, because we go from flowers to snow to leaves, and leaves you usually see in the autumn, right? And the eerily played, eerily is really strange or frightening, and it's the fact
definitely
that
a negative connotation with the fairies and the dead man. The
fact that he put together eerily and played, which is something that you would usually think is positive, like children's play. And then with the glittering things, also the use of the word things in association with the ring and the chain, which are considered the man's possessions.
It's kind of demoralizes it, just their things instead of more wealthy things.
Right. And when they went home to hide in their burrow, they took them along to play with tomorrow. So again, it also kind of shows that they took his belongings and they were planning on playing with them. And that's also very odd, specifically because they're a dead man's belongings and they're playing with them. So this is where you see that the fairies have a very, very malicious tone, just aura to them, that they're not positive fairies. They're not good fairies.
And then it kind of comes back to the beginning, saying, did you not come flower-guided when you came upon death? And saying from the beginning that they use that term flower-guided, which, like we said, means more like
having the best intentions or being more innocent.
You didn't think what happened would really happen. You were innocent about it. And so Robert Frost is kind of saying here, well, when you came upon death, didn't you come ignorant? Didn't you come innocent? And then that's almost kind of like defending the things that they did, that the fairies came upon it so accidentally, almost.
Mm-hmm. And he also personifies death, and he makes it its own entity. But he also says, when you came on death, did you not come flower-guided, like the elves in the woods? So suddenly the fairies become elves. And elves used to be portrayed as positive, entities, but as time developed and as the ages went on, specifically in the Dark Ages when religion was very prominent and it was just the Christian church changed the image of elves into being, like fairies, very malicious and just tricky, intent on doing bad things to people. So just mischievous as well.
And then the poem changes because this is the first time Frost uses the word I, which is almost kind of like a tone change to him speaking about his memories, the speaker's idea of what it all means.
Mm-hmm. He says, I remember that I did, but I recognized death with sorrow and dread, and I hated and hate the spoils of the dead. And so he's just looking back on the past, saying that, he kind of uses a rhetorical question with it, did you not come flower-guided like the elves in the wood? And he says that I remember that I did, that I was innocent, and I just didn't think about it as much. And then I came upon death, and I recognized it. He goes, and I recognized it with sorrow and dread, with deep distress, lamentation, apprehension, and fear. And I hated and hate. And the second to last line there just sort of adds emphasis with the use of the words hated and then hate. And he just recognizes the past and brings it back to the present. Right. How it does earlier in the poem. It was a still summer day, and the snow was long gone, a long time ago, and it brings it back to summer. So he just uses that again, like looking back on the past, he reflects on it and then comes back to the present. And the spoils of the dead. Now, the last line, you could think of it as spoils of the dead, almost as spoils of war, like just the goods stolen of the dead being, people.
Right. But stealing of life away.
Mm-hmm. Or you could look at it as death being its own entity, its own, it's like personified. So the spoils of the dead. So how death would take his spoils, which is human life.
Right. And you can definitely see that Frost has a personal connection to death, and looking back at his history, his father died when he was very young, somewhere around the age of 8 years old, and then he also had children of his die. So he had to go through death a lot, and you can see that through his works of poetry.
And so we could kind of relate this back to the death of his children, particularly because of just, playful and thinking the more, it's ominous and it's, it's very sinister, but it's fairy tale like, exactly, with, fairies and elves and flowers and glittering and just all those things.
Yep.
So that is Spoils of the Dead by Robert Frost.